Hi there, it's Marcus here. I'm sitting here with Shadi Rushabats, and I really just stumbled upon Shadi by accident because of the Oceania thing. I don't know how I've missed you for so long. I feel like I've known you for years, and yet we only met a few weeks ago. So there's a funny thing in life that sometimes people just click. And Shadi really caught my attention because she facilitated a talk that I was part of. You know, there were four of us up on stage, and then Shadi was the master of ceremonies, or the mistress of ceremonies, however you want to phrase that. And you did a wonderful job. I mean, really, you did a wonderful job. There was a lot of care and thought in preparing, but I also love the fact that the questions you told us you were going to ask us, you never did, because that really, that was wonderful, because immediately everything sparked just spontaneously, right? So Shadi is a reformed refugee from the UN. She is an Iranian woman who's shipwrecked in Australia. She works at the Uni of Melbourne and in Newcastle, and she's also doing a PhD in, what was the title, Shadi?
But the tentative title right now, and may change, is Reimagining the Futures of Inclusive Peace Building, Intergenerational Feminist World Building at the United Nations.
Okay, so it's autobiographical because she was in the United Nations. She's drawing on a whole bunch of her contacts to do that. But you know what really interested me was that Shadi was very present, and I've just discovered, and this is really cool, that Shadi does a lot of futures-based games with her students when she's teaching and so on. So we'll be asking Shadi about that in another recording. But this one is really more about the diasporic. What does it mean to be diasporic in a world where even though I'm an Australian living in Australia, I somehow feel diasporic too. I mean, I feel displaced. And Shadi sent me this beautiful book by Farrokhzad, a book of poetry, and I wanted to open, given that I've already opened, but it's the second opening, I want to open with a poem. Not the whole poem, because it goes for pages. This particular poet, she's an Iranian poet who died at 32 years of age in a car accident. And it's like she wrote with a broken heart from the very beginning. It's just an extraordinary, heart-wrenching sort of experience to dive into her poetry. And there are these windows of glory, and then it goes bang, slap, something comes from left of field. So and of course her writing is quite autobiographical. It's very much situated in her femininity, her womanness, in a very masculine world. There are all these things happening there. And even though she was Iranian and she died as an Iranian in Iran, she feels somehow diasporic as well. There's something else. So I thought, when I saw this poem, I thought, Shadi, I want to read you the opening lines of this and say, can you speak to that first? And then, of course, we'll get to know you a little bit better as we dig a bit deeper. So this poem's called Wind Up Doll. Longer than this, ah yes, one can remain silent longer than this. With a gaze fixed like the gaze of the dead, one can stare for long hours into the smoke of a cigarette or the shape of a cup, as the colourless flower on the carpet, at the faint line of writing on the wall. With withered fingers, one can draw aside the curtain and look in the alleyway. A heavy rain pours down. A child with his colourful balloons is standing in the doorway. A worn-out cart makes a racket, as it hurries out of the empty square. One can remain in place by the side of the curtain, but blind and deaf. To me, that goes, oh. I mean, there's so much there. So, Shadi, thank you, because Shadi gave me the book. Thank you for introducing me to this wonderful poet and human being. And where does that take us? It's over to you now. I've done a lot of gas backing. It's now your turn.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for having me, and thanks for reading the poetry. I think as Iranians, we're known for quite a number of things lately, especially, and poetry, sadly, is not one of them. even though I like to think think of Iranians as not all of them, but many of them as belonging to a nation of art and poetry and history, among other things. I think the other sort of habit that we have around the world is we like to look at culture through a Western lens. So if this helps with digesting Forough Farrokhzad a little bit better, she is known as the Sylvia Plath of Iran.
Makes sense. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I discovered her poetry, even for a Farsi speaker like me, is not an easy, comfortable read. You need to prepare yourself, knowing that you're threading what you beautifully put at diasporic grounds. Her words pretty much disperse your sense of normalness, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Your breaks through your most organized and most composed sense of the world. And there is a sense of yearning there, a sense of wanting to dream and to see things with pretty much and I wear glasses, so it's easy. A pair of glasses that is of another color and even another lens, if I can put that. And there's a lot of unveiling that goes through through Forough, and also through the diasporic experience, that not only do you discover a lot of things about the world as you read her poetry, but you also discover a lot of things about the self and the poet. And I think for her to be living in a physical, geographical country at one time, but also know that she does not necessarily belong there, and that's has a little bit been um, my experience of growing up. But the beautiful thing that also Forough brings to me to symbolism, and how we live life uh, inevitably, eventually, through the symbols that we associate ourselves with. I think that goes a long way. I mean, in the poem that you just read, the colorless flowers of a carpet, and then we are also Iranians very much known for carpets, which is also my earring has some carpet motifs on it. Um, Knowing that we always have these carpets in our rooms that are sun kissed from big old windows,
Yep.
like to just instantly be able to transfer yourself to a state of time and space that is so far away. Even now, many Iranian households don't use carpets because we've moved from that, let alone, being in exile, like not being able to find one that you like. And in some ways, as you move through Forough, you move through noise, and all your senses pretty much get carried through noise, through sound, through music, through yearning, through flavors. I mean, if you move forward, you will probably get a taste of everything. But also, as you said, you get punched by being reminded that you can at the same time be blind and deaf,
Yeah.
and yeah, and
Yes.
incapable of experiencing life to the fullest.
Yeah. So I mean, the whole point, I think, of poetry is to distill elements of the human experience, and then, of course, to communicate them. I see the boy with the balloons, and I see that because of my age, I can see back into the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
And I can see that I've not been to Iran, but I've been to places like Iran, sort of country places in north of India and places like that, where you can see a child standing in a doorway in a rainfall, maybe with some colour. I can see that so clearly. It's so poignant. And it takes you very viscerally into that world. And, for me, and it's a world that, even though it's gone, it's still here. because there are still parts of the world, many parts of the world, that are still living in the 1950s and 60s, and in many respects, in pre-modern times completely. So we're not modern. In fact, Bruno Latour said we've never been modern. I think that's that's quite
Fair.
right. All we've got is some contraptions around, but we're still going out and bashing one another and killing and doing all the kind of classical things we'd associate with very primitive
Yes.
behaviour. So when you came to Australia, you found yourself shipwrecked in a monolinguistic, monocultural flatland in many respects. But fortunately, you have married a Sri Lankan, which means you've got some other rich cultural elements around you. And of course, you bring your own world with you too. I'm interested in what you might call diasporic futures. And of course, that sounds really cool, but what does it mean? And what does it mean to you? Now, you've been doing futures work for quite a long time. You're doing a futures focused PhD. You're looking at imagination and at an institution that is not renowned for imagination. But you've got some great supervisors. You said that your external supervisor was Ivana Milojevic, Dr. Ivana Milojevic. Fantastic futures, feminist futures person. And of course, beside her is Sahana Ayatullah, whom I know you know quite well. So you've got people around that have obviously fostered and generated a rich futures set of glasses, to go back to your metaphor of glasses. Tell me, what does it feel like to be diasporic, first of all, in Sydney, in Australia, and then maybe what are your visions of this more broadly from a futures perspective?
So before I came to Australia, I was a diaspora in 4 other countries too. So I like to
In
think
Australia, we'd say
that,
you've been on walkabout. That's what we'd
yes,
say in Australia.
it's one of those walkabouts where I kind of halfway through lost my direction. I was like, where am I going now?
Yeah.
But yeah, I left home when I was 24 and I lived in Italy, France, Tunisia, New York in the US, and then Australia. And it's always been a movement between these. So it wasn't a linear trajectory, which means that I've moved in and out of these countries multiple times to the point that between 2018 and 2022, I was on average moving once every 4 to 6 months,
Wow.
sometimes 7. So it's become more about the suitcase than the bedroom. I think that's the best metaphor. So
Mm.
Helen and Ivana are talking through me. The suitcase, and it has, over the years, the suitcase has come through my psychoanalysis sessions with my therapist. That why do I love and hate this object so much? That it brings you the freedoms and the agility to transcend time and space, obviously within direct relation to the privileges that you have. But also it grants you a sense of permanent displacement,
Yeah.
to the point that you sometimes just crave having walls that are your own on which you can put paintings without being worried of leaving them behind in a state where you have to pay the bond to
Yeah.
fix the walls. Um, which, yeah, is trivial compared to other things that diasporas experience. But it's there, and it's part of the existence of being here. And then in Australia, I think the thing is, so yeah, my partner is, he was born and raised here, so he definitely is more of an Australian than a Sri Lankan. But I also am the firm believer that our displacements or our diasporic experience transcends our selves and moves through our upcoming generations.
Mm.
So, as a child of twice immigrant parents, I think he definitely brings in a very beautiful and agnostic mentality to the world, but being open to learning and the curiosity that comes. And sometimes I'm amazed by that because I like to think of myself as worldly and of being in a
Yeah.
perpetual state of displacement. But even then, I feel like he has less biased or less solidly formed views of the world. Whereas sometimes I tap into my end of the spectrum of imagination of how things could go differently. But all of this to say that the experience of being part of an Iranian diaspora here in Australia, because I don't think there is one single diaspora, even in one country. It's the way I explain this concept to my students who have never moved away from their hometown or their country or their state is that while you are in the state of mobility, meaning that you have moved from one place to another or you keep moving from one place to other places, you're also having this yearning for something bigger that is back home. Now, whether that's your ethnicity, your culture, your grandma's house, that image of that a little child with a balloon, or your favorite cup of tea or coffee, or the restaurant that you used to go to with your college friends, or whatever that you
Yeah.
feel like attaches you. And all of this is very much alive, if not thriving, in our imagination, which is why diasporas often, from an academic point of view, become very prominent in political movements, because that
Yeah.
imagination, becomes more powerful than the current status quo
Yeah.
governing a certain country. In Australia, being on the margins of my own diaspora communities, but also being within the proximity of other diasporic communities from other countries, it's a very interesting experience. That's not something that I, for example, really had in Italy, because in Italy, I was the straniera, I was the foreigner, and I embraced that identity very easily. Um, it's very easy to live when you're 100% sure no one can recognize your experience, just like, this is unique to me.
Yeah.
Don't try to figure out. But here now in Australia, the experience of seeking shelter and safety from certain communities, the experience of wanting to rebuild something new, but also still yearning for it. Again, depending on like, Italians here now are diasporic communities, which is mind blowing, because then I can relate more to them than I could back in Italy. I think the promise of, whether real or sort of like dream-like imaginary promise, that we have of rebuilding something better here, but then constantly being reminded to question whether it was the right decision for me to leave, or how could things
Yeah.
have gone differently had I stayed. I think that's the crux of why I am so drawn to futures, not just in the institution, the UN, because that has a much funnier and stronger way of, blowing up in your face, and reminding you that it is not built for reform, because it's built on all the good things, right? It's built on all the good principles, on human rights, on all sorts of
Yeah.
values that are not supposed to be reimagined, because, we always think they may run the risk of being reimagined into things that are not as glorious or as human centered, though I have my personal opinions on that at this point. But even as we talk about something like the homeland, um, futures thinking in and of itself, to me, is a diasporic practice, because you're constantly going between spheres of time, between what I think we call horizons in
Hmm.
some methodologies, if that makes it easier to grasp. But even then, one of the things that keeps me sane lately, in between doing research on an institution that is supposed to bring peace not just to my country, but to the world and to the future generations, and then seeing it just miserably fail, like, to me, that macro history, and then I can also again see Sohail speaking here, knowing that eventually we will all go towards a balance. And yes, it is May. She's May the 5th. A balance to the force of the world, as it has constantly shifted in different waves of time to come to where we are. I think that also isn't is a diasporic experience of in betweenness. It's very
Mm.
liminal. Um, it is very much grounded in experiencing things with your senses before they are settled out in the world, which is why we have, to me, multiple futures. The one that we end up actually materializing in a certain sphere or span of time is the one that we experience. Pretty much, you materialize that using your senses, collectively or individually.
Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds to me like you could actually do, well, you could do a CLA, the litany of diaspora, the system experience of systemic diasporic nature, then there's the worldview that goes with it, and of course, so would the suitcase be the myth metaphor for you, or what would it be? Well, and of course, you're not dragging the suitcase around quite so much now, but you are.
No.
You told me commuting between Sydney and Melbourne every week, which just blows my mind. But so yeah, run a CLA on that for us, please.
Funny enough, the reason why I decided to commit to futures as academic methodological work was a CLA of the self that I did. So I got to know futures and foresight in 2020 through the kind introduction of Adam Sharp, who is a friend from my past life, from my UN life, who was being that sounding board because I had graduated from my second master's in Europe. I'd done all of these moves with an Iranian passport, which sometimes gives you absolutely every single reason not to imagine Sisyphus happy. Like you just identify with the misery of Sisyphus.
Yeah.
And I was telling him, Adam, I'm doing everything. I'm getting shortlisted to the last round of interviews with ICRC, with a number of big organizations in the field that I'm, working. And I've come a very long way to be here. But it's not going through because I'm Iranian, because people have one look at the passport and they realize they can't hire me because they can't sponsor my visa. And in some way or shape or form, in their imagination, I was not constrained by my Iranianness.
Yeah.
Because they thought I am a permanent resident somewhere else in the world, which I am not yet, by the way. Or in some way or shape or form, that my competence, I like to think, among other things, somehow undoes that factor. And that was when, coinciding obviously with a number of things in the outside world, such as the women life freedom movement, Adam told me to do a CLA of the self. And he looked at the myth and the metaphor with me. And I realized that the attitude that I have, the passport or that diasporic identity used to be the weakness, but then it became the strength because I used that lived experience to tap into work that drives me. That yes, the actually the litany is the suitcase to me because I
Okay,
carry
cool.
it. Yeah, I physically carry it with me everywhere that I go. It has definitely shifted shifted in the form of moving from 60 kilos to being a 6 kilo carry-on. Now I have become significantly lighter traveler. I also like to think that's a metaphor for processing the traumas that I've experienced over the years. There is still the baggage.
Throwing them off.
Yes, throwing them off, and then in that same line, also wearing them when I need to do creative work that very much comes from the psyche, or even writing that comes from the psyche, from the mind and the heart, as you're just trying to throw in your extra 2 pairs of pajamas while you're being weighed at the gate to be specifically under 6 kilos. You're boarding your next JetStar
I know the
flight.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone has done that at least once. But yeah, the litany is the suitcase, and also I think wanting to make change, the desire to make change or to contribute to that greater like change, systemic change of our political systems, of our rights, of our responsibilities in the worlds that we come from. I think that is very much the second layer. As systems change, I did that for some time, thinking it was through my work with the UN or through being the only Iranian, young Iranian queer woman, whatever other identity adjective you want to associate to that. Speaking up in these places or making myself present wherever I've been systemically for decades, even before me, we were being pushed to the sidelines due to geopolitics and a number of other reasons.
Yeah.
But then when I do the worldview, I mean, the worldview is never easy to shape and form, because to me, a lot of it comes from the grief.
Yeah.
It comes from the potential that Iran or any like glorious nation or any glorious diaspora feels or sees as their right to have or to reproduce,
Yeah.
and how it has been crushed and tossed around by a variety of forces and unfortunate events, be that colonialism, be that invasions, conquests, political mismanagement, wars, conflicts. So these are definitely on the geopolitical side, but I also don't think any of those are only geopolitical concepts. I mean, the very fact that you enter the UN with that suitcase, with that Iranian passport, which, by the way, when I lived in New York, was a single entry 3 months visa. So I was hostage again. We took Americans hostage in 1980,
Yeah.
and now I'm paying the dividends back, being hostage in many countries over the years myself. So that is definitely the litany. And then you try to change those systems, but then you realize that the institutions are not built with people in mind. Just to quote yourself, the institutions are built with their own survival in mind, because they themselves also believe in a greater good. The global order is in the same way,
Yeah.
built to maintain and sustain itself. And if you want to oppose that because you have a greater imagination or something that disrupts that order, then you're sidelined, you're penalized, you're cast aside, and you're left to your own accords. Which is why that passport, when paired with the desire and all the other layers of that triangle, still makes me travel once every week to Melbourne to teach things to my students that I think is important for them. I'm teaching development theories this semester, and next semester I'm teaching ethics. So I'm teaching things that are in some way, shape, or form related to my studies,
Yep.
but beyond that are mostly related to my lived experience as a member of Diasporic, because you get to call those shots from your imagination and from how you materialize your imagination into the course of your life and also the lives of others.
Wow. That's a really powerful reflection, Shadi. Yeah, and I find myself, see, Australia is an interesting place for you to land, simply because even though there's this sense of Australianness, it's an Anglo-Australian sort of identity, it's only 2 centuries old. And in Australian studies, there are people who talk about the unsettled settler, that the Australian identity is still not really landed. I mean, Iran, Persia, it's thousands of years old. It's the birthplace of anything bigger than, a village. It's, is that enough to call it home? I mean, for me, what does it mean? Like, I tend to be somewhat, I go off on flights of fancy, so I get all the Heideggerian, so Heidegger, about being behomed. Where are we called to be? And what does home mean? What does it mean to you, Shadi? Can you give me any sense of what that might be?
Well, the thing is that over the years, I've been asking myself this question very often, and I think um, to me, it's definitely been where you build it.
Yeah.
And it's not a place per se. And it's funny because even within the years that I lived in Italy, like cumulatively, there are times that I felt more at home, and there are places that I've felt more at home, and they have not necessarily been overlapping with one
Mm-hmm.
another. So a lot of this happens in hindsight. Like you go back and you think, oh, that felt really nice. That felt like home for a brief time. And I think to call Australia home right now, for me, again, it's the moment, right? So having what I call the normal, boring adult life, to be in a settled relationship, to have my family here, to bring my dog from overseas that was an emotional support dog my got after my dad passed away, very tragically in a house fire, and to pay 25,000 US dollars to relocate this dog from Iran via a third
Oh
country,
God.
yeah, for 6 months, because of being Iranian, right? My dog is now Australian, was Iranian, and the same way myself. I think the stories of journeying and building are what makes us at home somewhere, at least for me. And the people, it's always the people for me. In some ways that a lot of and again, I have a lot of friends from around the world who are one phone call away, or maybe a few phone
Hmm.
calls with the time zones now here away, because they have to wake up, or I
Yep.
have to wake up, with a cup of tea to just chat and to recreate that space of belonging. And some of these are Iranians who they themselves have either been forced to relocate or made the choice to relocate. Sometimes I don't feel like the choice is actually a choice, but let's make that distinction here politically clear, that some would be in an imminent risk of death and others were in the risk of other things if they hadn't decided to relocate. And I think, to me, being able to create home as a sense of time and space is the most interesting one, because in the same way that when you as an Australian go abroad and see a tiny can of Vegemite in someone's pantry, and you honestly in that moment you're like, oh my god, this is the best. Like, why do you have this? Who brought you this? I mean, yeah, we have the koalas and the kangaroos, and we have all this, more iconic things that are known as, I guess, the identity of Australia. But I actually have a friend who lives in Finland and who has asked one of his friends to ship him the bins to recycle, like the tall bins that you
Yep.
have there, so he can store his trash in the way that he does. Or he did back home. So it is definitely the small elements. I mean, yes,
Little
I
things. Yeah.
tend, yeah, little things. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
historically in sophisticated, I guess, nuanced ways of art and culture and poetry, wherever I go in the world, I celebrate three very important days to me. Nowruz, the start of my new year, which is the start of spring. And to me, in my mind, 21st of March will always be the start of spring. It doesn't matter which state or which part of the
Yeah.
world I am, struggling a little bit here because we don't get the
The
flowers
wrong
in
side of the
season.
world, Shadi. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yes, the wrong side of the world. But in my mind, that's spring. And that state of mind for me is when I actually start writing my New Year resolutions. It's never 1st of January. I mean, I
Mm.
do trial them to see, like, I had a 3 month
Does it feel
trial.
okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like,
Mm.
yes, but I commit the 1st of March. The second one is Yalda night, which is the longest night of the year. It's the winter equinox.
Solstice.
Sorry, solstice. Sorry, and then the opposite one is in July. It's the so like that is the night where I buy the snacks or the fruits and nuts that we eat. I read poetry or eat hafez with whoever that is around
Perfect.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Charsham Mystery, which is the last Wednesday of the year, where we jump over fire and we celebrate the end of the last, sorry, Tuesday evening of the year. We celebrate the end of a year and the beginning of a new season with the warmth of overcoming winter. So these are like rituals, I guess, that take you home and make you feel like you're part of something. It's
Yeah.
sometimes it's just music that you play or the
Yeah.
food that you cook to eat. um it's that more than anything, but it's also having that blank canvas, that I think goes very un it escapes, it doesn't go underappreciated. Sometimes it is naughty and it escapes, because I also get to be who I want to be here, and to some extent it is defined by my passport in the way that it has been. I've gotten various labels over the years. I've been labeled as terrorist. I've been labeled as this.
Terrorist.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, you're an imagination terrorist.
well, that too. That
Got to be
that is.
careful.
I
I want to
identify.
be an imagination terrorist too, Shadi.
I identify with that label more actually than with the label of being, held back in the airport, being told you're a terrorist or from a terrorist country,
Yeah.
being labeled as the strong, resistant human rights woman, feminist activist, whatever. The label of being pro Hamas, being a Zionist, being, subversive, subaltern, like just
Mm,
the world sees you at different points of time as a different person, and
yeah.
sometimes that crisis of imagination can become a crisis of identity if you're not,
Mm, mm,
firm in where you want to be. And I think nothing but a host country can gift you this blank slate, because there are people who tend to slip back into wanting to reproduce exactly those values that they had back home, which to me in the Australian context would be the Anglo, pretty
yes,
much the Anglo culture
absolutely.
that comes with, but it's also and we are unfortunately, back to my imagination terrorism, we are unfortunately at a peak decline of multiculturalism here. Just as I arrived. You timed it well. So bringing in the wealth of your cultural, ethnic, or even myriads and centuries of indigenous wisdom that exists here, which I think is not separate even from the most unsettled settler,
Yeah.
because you see it in the way that you see an Australian and put them beside a British person or an American person, who are all in one way or another from the Anglosphere,
Mm,
to me. But when you see them outside of their elements, you see ways of being that are very different.
yeah. Yeah. So I'm just looking at the time. We should be wrapping this up shortly. But to me, so that would I be right in suggesting, having listened to the way you've described the diasporic experience and consciousness, and that diasporic futures actually have advantages, that because things are unsettled, often our imaginations get corralled and captured because we are settled. We're committed to, a narrow worldview. Could you offer some thoughts on that just before we wrap up?
Absolutely. I very actually recently did a lecture on diaspora activism,
Mm-hmm.
which is, to me, like, the prerequisite for that is to be able to envision things differently. So I've come up with this. Well, I haven't really come up with it. I mean, I've done my research on it, but the way that I'm applying on it, applying it onto my work, is that diasporic activism, or the diasporic active change making,
Yep.
is settled in between three circles, between connection, imagination, and translation. Because as a member of the diaspora, you first have to envision alternative futures for your homeland.
Yep.
And it's easier to do that at a distance because you're not constrained by the reality that
Mm.
kills imagination, or is better at killing imagination. I'm not going to be
Sure.
very determinist there. At the same time, you need to maintain connection and be grounded, because it's not difficult to get carried away when
Yeah.
you're imagining. Though I believe from my generation onwards, and I was born in 94, so I'm 32, which is the age that Forough died. Not to be ominous there, but
Yeah.
at the age of 32, I'm seeing my generation and folks who are younger struggling with imagination, or at least positive things, or warm and fuzzy things that we
Oh, it's
like to
hard.
imagine.
Yeah. You
It's
have to
hard,
really
and I don't
work.
blame them. Yeah. I completely, I empathize. But having said that, the idea of being connected to the reality of that generation
Yeah.
and to the state of the affairs in our homeland, in my case, Iran, is very important, because you can get carried away. Like, you can become disconnected and just wander somewhere else and die in your beautiful alternative imagination. Having said that, that disconnection also risks us to be reproducing past imaginaries.
Yes.
And that's something that I'm terrified of, honestly. And we talked about this in the piece that I've written with Eva Olumi and Sohail Ayatollah on the futures of Iran. And I think most importantly, the third angle of this, I don't even know if it's a
Translation.
triangle, but whatever it is the translation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is communicating between your desired imagination of that homeland, the realities that exist in contemporary times outside in the world that is unfortunately not always very kind, and also maintaining the connection to your sense of self, to your sense of imagination, but also to the people who are detached from you. That is the only way that I think we can communicate our struggles and translate them properly, not just linguistically, which I do from time to time in between English, French, and a number of the languages, but also from the sense of translating the pain and the grief, the point that I'm struggling now to translate to others what it feels like to be living under an internet shutdown for over 100, I think, 10 days.
Yeah.
Since the beginning of the war and the beginning earlier in the protests in Iran. So where is it that I'm not translating this properly is, for instance,
Yeah.
one of the challenges that I have, or maybe it's just beyond the world's imagination, which is why being diasporic puts you in a strategic position of envisioning things that are so close but also so far at the same time, and then struggling to actually literally communicate with Iran, for example, right now having
Yeah.
to do that through myriads of channels,
Yeah.
which I write.
I'm talking
Yeah,
to an Iranian woman on this, but she can't email me even. She can't
yeah,
email me. She has to use, I think it's LinkedIn. They're messaging through LinkedIn.
yeah, through different ways of communication that
Yeah.
we
No, I get
create
that.
or generate.
Yeah, but looking at that three circles, it reminds me very much of some of the work that I've done on heritage futures. That how do we translate heritage? So the translation is there, the imagination is there, and that imagination is potentially creative, but you can recreate or try and recreate
Yes.
in some kind of fossilized, unliving way the continuity patterns, which of course you alerted us to as you referred to that, but you can be creatively traditionalist. So you've
Yes.
got your traditions that you've drawn, and you walked through them just before. So creative traditionalism is an approach to being in time as a cultural being who's alive to what optimizes what we have
Yes.
and what's worth bringing forward. What
Right.
parts of
Yes.
this culture do we value,
Absolutely.
celebrate, and what parts have not served us?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to do a little bit in my Substack on Iranotopia, because um,
Yeah.
again, the way that the world sees any country is a very inaccurate way
Advertising.
of yes. Thank you for the
Iranotopia,
promo.
there it is. There it is. That's a beautiful
And
Substack.
you can subscribe for free. It's in its early stages, but when a country or a concept is
Yeah.
only seen through one angle, and I think that is the frustrating part of it, is that all that you said, all the tradition, all the heritage, all the values, the good things get lost.
Yeah.
And I think what goes wrong with non-future oriented work, or surface level litany work, because every other day someone from ABC calls me to come explain why this person has done this, or why has Trump attacked or not attacked yet, and I'm like, I don't want to do these analyses anymore, not just because I don't think anyone actually legitimately knows what will happen
Well,
some
it's such a
days.
random thing.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
you're
such a
right.
random thing. But even with the more substantial and nuanced geopolitical analysis, none of these are lost to us as much as as you said, the traditions or the values or the imagination driving them is lost to the average political analyst, like
Yeah. Yeah.
analyst and political analysis. So I think with Iranotopia, that's my goal. It is to go deep, as deep as possible, which is why it's not a very frequent read, but to pretty much get to the depth of why certain cultures or traditions in our psyche as an Iranian creates certain outcomes. And to give you an example, I am doing a lot of work on our ancient Zoroastrian history, on the myths, on the poetry that we've had, and the images that exist in our minds from our childhood, And even
Ahura
through the
Mazda
education.
rocks. I need to get a
Yes.
tattoo, an Ahura Mazda tattoo on my arm for you.
Yeah,
Very
Ahura
good.
Mazda, yeah, stuff that is very much lost to us, except that you still have it in your education system as you grow, because no civilization can entirely, and that's something that is funny to say, but no civilization can be entirely wiped off the face of the earth, no
Yeah.
matter how hard it is to
Now,
try. But
Australians
that,
have tried to do that to our Indigenous people and we failed. Thankfully, I'm totally grateful that,
yeah,
civilization is resilient and we need to
yes,
remember that, don't we?
exactly.
I remember when the Shah got kicked out because I'm really old, and I remember that. And then I remember in 1981 or two, I bought my 3 volume set of Hafiz. So I've been traveling with Hafiz for a long time, all the
Okay.
ghazals and so on. Beautiful pieces of, I don't know, just humanity. It's just humanity. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes I think diaspora can be rethought as actually home is where we find our humanity.
Exactly, where you can thrive.
Yeah. I want to thank you for giving us this time. And
Of
there's
course.
so many things we could continue to discuss, but I know that for our faithful listeners here, we should wrap this one
Yes.
up. And I'm going to drag you back because I do want to hear about your pedagogical approaches to futures. I think that would be very interesting. And as the Iranotopia grows, and I love this, the utopic itself is a way of seeing across space and time, because what you're talking about is deeply temporal. That the
Very temple.
temporality behind that little diagram that you showed us that's implicit until you suddenly say, hang on a second, time and culture, identity, they do this kind of thing, this kind of. So there's much there to talk about, but we will stop the recording now, and I want to thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.